Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm obviously not Mark, but I hope I can do something, at least give you something worthwhile in his stead. So, my name's Dave Coplin. I work for the UK arm of Microsoft, and the first thing you have to understand is I have a comedy job title. I am Microsoft UK's Chief Envisioning Officer. Check me out. The job title is important, right? It's really important. Remember, I work for a company that loves to talk about technology and products. We love to talk to all of you about the great technology and the products that we make. And that's brilliant, right? But the reality is, what we don't talk about enough, or at least for me at least, is we don't talk enough about the human beings that use those products. So my job with Microsoft is about projecting out to the future, looking at how human beings are going to want to live, work, and play. Because we think if you understand that side of the equation, you can be much more mindful about the sort of technology that they require. So understand, my job is essentially about the future of humanity. Right? How cool is that? And I just figured, if I'm going to have a job about the future of humanity, I demand a job title with a certain degree of pomposity. I think you'll see I've achieved that. Also, when I told me mum, when I was a kid, I said to me mum, Mum, one day, I'm going to be CEO at Microsoft. You just watch me. And you'll be aware that there's recently been an opening. And this is still the only way I'm going to get that job title. The other thing you have to understand about me is my background. And the only way I can really explain it is I stand in front of you as an individual who has I've dedicated my entire career to the IT industry, some 20-odd years. I've chosen to work for one of the world's largest technology companies. I have gone to the extremes of personal grooming to grow a beard and a ponytail. And I also quite like Star Trek. Right? What a surprise. This is my 8th birthday party. It's my mum and my Auntie Mabel. And the reason Star Trek's important, right? When you're a young, naive, gullible kid like what I was, Star Trek teaches you that technology is supposed to be a force for good in our society. It's supposed to be this thing that enables human beings to rise up and achieve more than they could on their own. This is why I took up a career in IT. This is why I work for Microsoft. But my problem is that 20 years in, I look around how people use technology every day, and I don't see this great liberating force. Instead, I see a prison. I see something that constrains how we work. It constrains how we think. And I refuse to accept that as our future. And the challenge is not about the technology. Interesting, the challenge is all about the human beings that use them. We also wanted to create a very different story from Microsoft. We wanted to really focus on the outcomes that technology affords. And the genesis for this story actually started a few years ago with a buddy of mine who runs the business audience PR for Microsoft. And frankly, we just got so fed up with writing Microsoft case studies that we felt that there was a different way. There was a different option. You'll be familiar with a Microsoft case study. Important documents though they are, but typically they start with a pithy business problem, some big UK brand name in the middle, BA, Tesco's, doesn't really matter, and then a SharePoint implementation at the bottom, right? Or an Azure, whatever. And while they're important, don't get me wrong, they don't really capture people's imagination about what's possible with technology. They don't really help people understand what we can do. So we set about a very different path. Last year I wrote a book called Business Reimagined: Why Work Isn't Working. And it really put a lens on the way in which we work, the way we use technology in the workplace, and how actually it's really shaped by our past experiences of our working life. And as a result, we end up missing the point of the gift that technology actually enables. If you want to know more about that story, we'll give you some just a bit more context because it sets up where we're going to go next. So this would be an interesting audience to do this with, but put your hand up if you have a computer at home. Keep your hand up if the computer you have at home is better than the one you have at work. Right? Difficult audience, I understand. I ask this question every audience I talk to. I love it if it's a public sector audience. It's like shooting fish in a barrel at that point. But the reality is simple, right? For me, we all have a richer experience of technology in our personal lives than we're allowed to in our professional lives. Most people, we have grandparents Skyping grandkids, we live online, we shop online, we do all of these great, wonderful things in our personal lives, and then we go to work. And this is how most people feel about technology at work. They feel constrained, they feel controlled. They walk in the door in the morning, they're greeted by some long-haired, beardy git like me in IT who just likes to say, no, you can't. You can't do that. And I find that really bizarre, right? I've spent most of my career chasing people down corridors like some bizarre, freakish stalker, just trying to get them to care about what technology might do for them and their business. And the interesting thing is, thanks to consumerization and things like that, the chase still continues today, but these days it's the other way around. People are chasing me down the corridor, trying to figure out why they can do all of this cool stuff at home, but they can't do it at work. We did some more work with the RSA on this as well. We did one of those lovely animates, and I'm only sort of putting this up. If you want to understand more about this story, here it is in a 9-minute overview of a video. You can go and see this on the RSA website. But the story was essentially based on this. The main hook was that the fact that most people are disengaged at work, so normal, everyday workers. We used a stat from the US that basically said, on average, 71% of the US workforce is disengaged at work, not really that bothered about what they're doing. Similar numbers in the UK, it's about 65%. And without making any kind of moral judgment about whether it's better to work to live or live to work, the reality for me is, given the amount of time we will all spend at work in our working lives, the thought of not being engaged, frankly, terrifies me. But also the reality is it doesn't take a genius to figure out the correlation between disengaged employees and the outcomes for your customers. Disengaged employees, I bet you, disengaged customers. And so we wanted to understand that problem further. And what we found was frankly terrifying, because we found so many of the problems come from what are the stalwarts, the foundations of how we think about our everyday working lives. The main problem is our definition of productivity. Our definition of productivity is formed by the Industrial Revolution. We went from a world of artisans creating things to a streamlined, standardized, industrial, mechanized process. We think it's better for organizations. They can make more things more quickly, more cheaply. If they forget about the end result, they forget about the product they're making, and they split that product up into a series of standardized, interlinked processes. So, for example, if I work for a car manufacturer, I no longer care about how good the car is, because I'm making widgets, right? And why this is the gesture for making widgets, I don't know. It kind of feels like it should be. And the thing is, you're paying my salary on how good the widgets are. And you're going to pay my bonus on whether I make the best damn widgets this company has ever seen. And at that point, you've disconnected me from the outcome of the organization. It doesn't matter if the car's crap or not. It really doesn't matter to me, as long as my widgets are okay. But secondly, and more importantly, by creating these standardized interlinked processes, you create this rigid sclerotic infrastructure inside organizations that resists change. So when your industry changes, when your market changes, when you hit a recession, the problem is all of your processes are built to resist that change. You cannot change from making cars to making aeroplanes without breaking your entire organization. And understand that this is our definition of productivity today. And the reality is that shouldn't be our definition of productivity. We should be focused on the outcomes. We should be much more agile as organizations. And then there's the places that we work. The office itself is a massive constraint. Now, you all live relatively different lives, I would guess, to many office workers. How many of you work in an open plan office? Well, open plan offices were genius in the 50s and 60s on the West Coast US. If you wanted to get a group of people to collaborate together, the only choice you had would be to shove them all in the same physical space in the middle of the room, and they would talk to each other. How many of you sit in your open plan office and email the person sat next to you? What time are we going for lunch? I don't know. Where are we going to go? I don't know, right? Just insane. But the real problem with open plan offices is actually they are creativity killers. If you want to be creative, if you want to be really, really cognitive, trying to do that in an open plan office is just not going to happen. The brain doesn't work in that way. There are too many distractions. There are too many disruptions. So we're trying to wake people up to the opportunity to do things differently. But what we found at the end of that first book, the end of that first story about why work isn't working, is actually so much of the problem lies with what my dad calls the interface between the keyboard and the chair. The human beings. Because it's our expectations of technology, it's the things that we do with technology that actually control its success. And that's why we set out to really do more work into that, and that's the book that we released a month ago. I'm a cheap date, by the way, so all the books are available for free if you want an electronic version, so you can get them from Amazon if you have a Kindle, or you can see me and I can send you a link. And this story is the story I want to tell you today, and it's called The Rise of the Humans, because it's really a story about data and machine learning, but we'll get into that a bit later. So the place we start is this thing called the digital deluge. You're all aware of this, right? We live in a world of too much information. As we walk around, we are bombarded. The data that we have available to us is just too bloody much. Who doesn't get enough email? Right? I don't even have to write a punchline to that joke. We all get the insanity of that. But there's another dimension to the deluge that actually makes the problem much, much worse. And it's these things. The introduction and now the prevalence of these beautiful, engaging consumer mobile devices means that not only do we have access to too much information, we have access to too much information wherever we are, whatever we're doing. And frankly, we can't cope. We can't cope. We don't understand what we need to do. And as a result, we end up in this place where, frankly, technology is just a pain in the backside. Gets in the way. It doesn't work in the way that we want. We all feel stressed. We're working harder. We're multitasking. And yet the whole thing's not working for us. And I actually think history is a great teacher for all of these things. And so if you look back to our history, I would actually like to place all of the blame for our current woes with technology with one individual. It's Alexander Graham Bell, right? He bloody started it. It's all his fault. Because he created in 1876 an incredible thing. He took us from a world of machine-to-machine communication. So if you wanted to communicate across geographical distances in 1875, for example, you had to have a human operator operating a telex or a telegraph machine. They would encode a message into a series of dots and dashes, shove it down a strand of copper wire to another machine, and it would be transcribed. What Alexander Graham Bell did was brilliant, because he took that from a machine-to-machine process to a human-to-human. He enabled human beings to engage in a very natural experience, even though they were separated by huge swathes of geography. But the problem is, we didn't stop there. We now live in this incredible world. Thanks to these things, I can stand on any street corner and I can phone pretty much anywhere in the world. But this really interesting paradox has started to happen, because while technology is brilliant at connecting people who are geographically separated, increasingly, it's disconnecting people who are not separated, people who are in the same physical space. And it's happening at work. We've talked about this. We sit behind our screens in the open plan office and we huddle ourselves, we bury ourselves in our headphones, we try and isolate ourselves. Technology has become a barrier to how we communicate and collaborate at work. It's happening at home. Those of you with kids will recognize this picture. Let me tell you, family time in a Copland household goes a bit like this. We will decide, for a change, wouldn't it be nice? Let's all sit down at the table for dinner. Wouldn't that be nice? We'll have some family time. It'd be brilliant. So we sit down, there's my wife, my son, and me. And I sit down, I get out my work phone. My son sits down, he gets out his nameless tablet device. My wife sits down, she gets out her. We sit in our own bloody little digital worlds. We don't talk anymore. We just sit there, we sit watching the TV, and someone's on a screen, not watching the TV, isolated from what's going on. We isolate ourselves from life as well. How many times have you been to a concert or some big public event only to see hundreds, if not thousands of people enjoying the event from 4 inches behind a glowing bloody rectangle? I went up to a bloke, I said, what are you doing? You know, you're here, enjoy the event. He said, it's all right. I've got an HD camera, right? And I'm like, yes, so have I. It's called my eyes. You know, people don't understand what's going on. And the thing is, we have to remember that we're but the first generation of a digital society, and we haven't yet really figured out this technology thing. We're still evolving our etiquette about how technology can work for us and what we need to do. And as a result, we've developed some coping mechanisms that we think help, but are actually really problematic. And I want to talk to you about 4 of them today. So the first coping mechanism is a thing I call skimming. And it's what we do all of the time when we acquire information, because we basically surf across the surface of the water. We never dive deep. We're too busy looking for the next piece of information. If you work in a team or you manage a team, you will often hear this, don't send me a long bloody email. Summarize it into 3 or 4 bullet points and then I'll read that. We live in this world where we no longer have the context of what's going on. Our second coping mechanism is a thing called snacking or binging. Thanks to these devices, wherever we go, we can snack or binge on information all the time. And there's a really important thing to understand about how the brain works that supports this kind of behavior. Because the brain works on a reward system. Every time you do something that the body feels like is contributing to your survival, you get a little hit of dopamine, a reward for doing that. And the thing is, the brain thinks that accessing more information is going to be important for your survival. Not doing anything with it, by the way. So if you contrast 2 experiences, sit doing some heavy coding work or some architecture work, whatever it might be, versus reading email, the brain would rather that you read email. In fact, the brain would much rather that you read one email after another. So the brain rewards you for choosing email after email or tweet after tweet or link after link, rather than taking time to step back and think about how you answer the next one. And it's really important to understand that, not because you shouldn't do that, but you should be making conscious choices about when you choose to do it. And then there's the other coping mechanism we have, which is filtering. And filtering is a bit weird, right? Because filtering is really important. If we're going to make sense of all of the data that's out there, of all of the information, we're going to need some filters to help us. And those filters could be search engines, they could be recommendation engines, anything like that. But we have to understand that the filters are limited. If you live in a world where you only ever get shown things that the filters think you might like, how do you ever find stuff that you don't know you like? How does serendipity occur in those places? And so again, with filters, it's about being mindful. When can a filter help? And when should I actually expose myself just to everything so that maybe I'll discover something new? But the final coping mechanism is my favorite of all, because it's the thing that we still believe to this day is something that is an essential, crucial 21st century life skill. And this is the lie of multitasking. We all think to survive in our modern society, to cope with the information overload, to deal with the pressures of work and busy living, we have to multitask. But we forget in that equation that multitasking is not a human concept. Multitasking is a computer concept. Multitasking was invented in the mid-60s by a bunch of computer scientists in white lab coats who were trying to get central processing units to be more efficient. We've inherited that as human beings, thinking, yeah, if we could work more like the machines, life will be great. Well, we know from our studies that the average human being, male or female, right, no difference, that when you multitask, you are a third less efficient than when you focus on the task that you're doing. But it gets worse. Because every time you're distracted, because of that little reward system I mentioned, you don't go straight back to the work you're doing. So in the middle of doing some heavy-duty coding, you get distracted. The brain would much rather that you reward yourself first. We did some experiments on our own people, because we're like that. And what we found, we took a bunch of coders, and we just measured what they were doing. We monitored the work that they were doing. And we found, on average, the time from the completion of the distraction to the time they got back to doing the coding that they were doing was, on average, 23 minutes. Because what was happening is, as they finished the distraction, before going back to their heavy-duty work, they were going, do you know what? I'll just check the email before I go back. Just see what's happening on Twitter. I'll just check the footy scores. So they would meander their way back and eventually get back to work. So this lie of multitasking means that not only are we a third less efficient, we're also wasting a whole bunch of time every time we get distracted, simply because we think this is the way to do it. But the scariest thing, the scariest place of all, is when combined, all of these coping mechanisms come together to put us in a place where we're losing some crucial skills as human beings. We're losing the ability to think deep. We're losing the ability to establish context for what we're doing. In a world of 3-line emails, in a world where we consistently snack and binge and skim across the surface of the water, we never, ever take the time to go deep. And the challenge is, we've got to be really mindful about the kinds of choices we make, about the things that we do with technology. Because technology is absolutely crucial, but only when it's used in the right way. If I give you an example, it's a personal example of mine. So I will put my son to bed at night, and I enjoy the time I spend with him. And there's this little window of time, right? He's 8 years old, between when he's in his pajamas and when he's actually in bed waiting for his story. And in that window, he will bugger off and he will go and clean his teeth. And at that point, I am completely redundant in the proceedings. So at that point, I do what any good working dad would do. I reach for my phone. I say, I'll just have a quick look, see what's going on at work. Now, the thing is, I do that to fill in time, completely oblivious to the effect that's going to have on me as an individual. Because what happens the minute I click on that email button, I am no longer at home. I am no longer with my son. Mentally, I am back at work. Now, best case, when he's in bed waiting for his story, he's got a slightly distracted dad. Because remember that 23 minutes thing? I'm still thinking about all of that context about what's going on at work. Worst case, I get one of those emails that you get sent from time to time from your boss or your colleagues that just sends you into a froth of rage. And at that point, he can forget his bloody story, right? Because I'm off down, I'm going to sort this out, right? And the point is, I didn't make that conscious decision. When I picked up my phone just to check my email, I was just killing time. And I was oblivious to the impact that it would have to what I was doing. So we think there's an answer here. There's a very different answer. And the thing that we've got to understand is this deluge, the world of too much information, is actually a gift, not a curse. You know, how stupid is it, right? We think that the future belongs, our success in the future belongs to having more data and more information. We will become better organizations, we will become better individuals if we can use data more efficiently. And then we complain about having too much. So we complain about having too much of the very stuff that will enable our future. To me, it's a bit like complaining that you've got too much money or too much chicken tikka. Two things in my world that you could never have enough of, right? And it's just insane. So we've got to turn this around. We've got to turn around this whole attitude, this aspiration to what technology can achieve for ourselves and our customers and our organizations, to start to think about how do we harness this deluge, not hate it. And there are some places that we think that you can start, some things that we can do to help. So the first is to think about how you think about your customers. And the challenge that we've got to do is data enables us to see our customers in multiple dimensions. But traditionally today, most organizations see their customer in a single dimension, one dimension. So when I walk in through the door of the electronics shop, their only interest is, why is Dave here? Oh, he's here to buy a TV. Brilliant, let's sell him a TV. That's the one dimension. Some organizations, they had a second dimension. Amazon's a good example of this. They had a historical dimension. Last time Dave was here, he's bought books on Batman. Let's show him some books on Spider-Man. That would be brilliant. But the thing is, data now offers us a really different view, because there are two more dimensions that are really important that we can now start to access. The third dimension is how to understand me as a holistic whole human being. And the thing you have to understand, that as human beings, we exhibit up to 10 to 12 different personalities or personas every single day. There's a study the government did last year that showed this. It's a brilliant piece of work. And we're not all running around with multiple personality disorder. The reality is we have different affiliations. So I stand in front of you, not just Dave, the Microsoft employee. I'm Dave the dad. I'm Dave the motorcyclist. I'm Dave the ice hockey fan. All of these things are me. And I will choose one of those personas to be my primary persona at any given moment in time. And here's where the first two dimensions fall down, because when I rock up at Amazon, you know, a few weeks ago, it was my son's birthday, so what do? I go to Amazon, I buy him some Lego, because I'm a good dad. So 2 weeks later, when I come back to Amazon, and I'm no longer Dave the dad, I'm now Dave the business person interested in books about whatever it might be, motorcycle, I don't care, right? What does Amazon then show? Hey, Dave, welcome back. Would you like some more Lego? No, I bloody wouldn't, right? You know I've bought the Lego. You know my son's birthday was 2 weeks ago. It's still a while till Christmas. You should be understanding who I am right now. And the data is increasingly there, so customers need to start to think about how they hook into that data. And then the final dimension of how we can start to see the customer is a social dimension. And the social dimension is really important for a couple of reasons. One, you have to understand the power that individuals can exert on your brands, on your organizations, just by using social media properly. I don't know if any of you are familiar. My favorite story of this is the United Break Guitars story. Are you familiar with that? Have you come across that? I'll just tell you it quickly. So there's a Canadian musician, a guy called Dave Carroll. He's doing a tour of the US. He's doing an internal flight in the US, and he's doing what we all do in the airport buildings. He's standing at the terminal, looking out the window onto the tarmac to see the plane being loaded. And as he looks down on the tarmac, he sees two blokes in United overalls, basically playing football with a guitar case. They say, oh, bloody hell, that's terrible. And he looks a bit closer. Bloody hell, that's my guitar case. Sure enough, he turns up at his destination. His guitar's smashed to pieces. It's a $3,500 Martin guitar. It's his livelihood. He contacts United. What do United do? They tell him to bugger off. Really not interested. You've got travel insurance. Sort it out through there. Well, that's not good enough for Dave Carroll. And Dave Carroll, being a good musician, does what every good musician would do in that situation. He writes a song. He creates a really funny video that he posts on YouTube. Within a couple of weeks, he's got over 1 million hits, and United have no choice but to capitulate and sort him out. Now, that's where most people end with that story, and it's a good example of what people call twining, whining over Twitter. But The Economist went further, and they thought, well, what's the financial impact to United of that? And bear in mind, it was some rough math. They did it on the back of a napkin, and they basically figured out that that one instance, that single intervention by Dave Carroll, knocked $180 million worth of value off their share price. This is the power that individuals in a connected world have, and you have to understand that. But that's not the only thing about understanding the social dimension of the customer, because actually the social dimension gives a really good insight to the relationship that people have with each other. And when you understand that relationship, you can use the service to deliver different experiences, and actually you can help the individual, the consumer, make different choices. Let me give you an example. In the US, our search engine Bing has a feature where, with your permission, it will link to your Facebook. And what it will do as you search for things, it will show which of the results have been liked by your friends. Now, this is really cool, because actually, if you have real friends on Facebook, as opposed to my fake friends on Facebook, the experience becomes very different. We had the service running in the UK for a couple of weeks. We were doing some testing, and I had this experience. It was brilliant. So I'm walking down Victoria Street near our office. It's lunchtime. I'm searching for sushi on my phone, and because Bing's a good search engine, it brings me back the 10 nearest restaurants. Now, what it also shows me, restaurant number 2 has been liked by my buddy Simon. Now, Simon, unlike the rest of my Facebook friends, is a real person. He and I grew up together. He's my best mate from school. And what I know about him is actually really helpful to the decision I make, because he and I grew up in the East Midlands. Now, the East Midlands, we grew up in Derby, right? Now, if you know your English geography, you'll know that Derby is pretty much as far as the coast as you can get in England. Now, the thing I know about Simon is he actually never left the East Midlands, still there to this day, never bloody travelled. So here's a guy who the only thing he knows about raw dead fish is when it's battered and deep fried, telling me that this is a good restaurant. On the basis of that recommendation and my knowledge about him, I know I am never, ever going to that restaurant because it's going to be crap, right? Negative example, but you take my point. So the point is, if you can understand those dimensions of the customer, so that's the dimension, the transaction they're about to do, the historical dimension, but also them as a holistic human being, and their social dimension, then actually you can be much more insightful to what's going on. Organizations are going to have to start to stitch together these disparate data sets to provide that holistic view, because there's absolutely loads of opportunity out there. In order to do that, organizations have to think very differently about their employees. They have to connect them. They have to democratize the workforce. We have to unbox the inbox. We have to take the information that's locked away in our email and make it available for other people to use. We need to give people the tools to do that. We need to give people the culture so that we're no longer focused on these rigid structures, that actually we've got a much more malleable organization that will respond to the changes. But really, the gift is all about data. And this is the big challenge I think we face as an industry. I think Microsoft has this challenge with its customers about helping them understand the gift that data holds. Most organizations are sat on a gold mine of data, and they really don't understand it. They're sat on a bunch of data that they look at that's typically generated as a byproduct of what they do, and they look at the data, and that's brilliant. We're going to use that data to create more insight about what we do. And we talk about big data, and then we talk about business analysis and business intelligence. That's like 20% of what data is going to give you. Because hidden in that data is a whole bunch of value. And it's value probably in 3 areas. The first area is, I bet you most organizations are sat on data that has monetary value to other organizations, if only they could see it. Maybe they could use that data and they could sell it. They could put it in a data marketplace, like the Azure data marketplace, and make it available for sale. If you think differently about the data, the options that you have, different options will arise. The second area is the magic that happens when you connect disparate data sets. So you have 2 seemingly disconnected or random data sets, you bring them together and you get new insight. The insurance industry offers a brilliant example of this because they know that if they tap into consumer spending behavior, they can be much more insightful as to the financial status and the financial risk of their customers. Because they know if you're the sort of person that buys those little felt discs to put underneath your furniture to stop them scratching the floor, you're several times more likely to make your payments than if you don't. Right? Who knew? So this is what happens when you connect disparate data sets together. You get new insight. And the third space is if you're going to generate new data in your business, then actually think about multiple uses for that data. So if you're, for example, sticking CCTV into your retail outlets, don't just look for shoplifters. Measure the foot flow through the store. Use that data for something else. So when you start to see data in this way, you start to see the value, and it starts to inform and enable complete transformation in your business. But all of this is just a preamble to the big deal. And the big deal is machine learning. And if you haven't figured this out yet, and I'm sure you have given this audience, machine learning is essentially the future of our relationship with technology. Machine learning is statistical-based pattern recognition, and it enables the creation of some incredible services. It starts in a pretty basic place. We're all now comfortable with the fact that when we type in a search query, it auto-completes the query for it. Do you remember the first time that happened and you were a bit freaked out? And all that's really happening is a bit of statistical analysis that basically says, based on the characters you've entered, the statistical probability of you entering the rest of the sentence is 93%. So we're going to offer that first. And it starts there, but it goes to some really special places. Here's some of my favorite examples. This was we released about 3 weeks ago, and this is essentially real-time speech-to-speech translation through Skype. This is all powered by machine learning, the power of big data and machine learning. So we have a gentleman speaking German, a lady speaking English, connected via a Skype call. The gentleman speaks German, the lady hears English, real time. Conversely, lady speaks English, the gentleman hears German. This is transformational. And this is just one example. There are hundreds. But based on this, to give you the size of the scale of the transformation, do I get my son to learn a foreign language given this kind of technology? Now, I get that's controversial. I get that's provocative. You don't just learn languages for academic reasons. But the technology powered by machine learning is going to enable us to do really, really different things. Here's another example. This is from our labs. This is a project called Surround Web. And it's essentially a consumer-grade device. Think of something like a Kinect, but with a projector in, that sits at the back of your room and scans the walls looking for available wall space. And when it finds available wall space, it starts to project contextual content to whatever it is that you're doing in the room. Whether you're playing Forza or watching the TV, or maybe you walk in with something like a Coke can. We can recognize the Coke can. We know that you follow Coke. We can deliver something really engaging. All powered by machine learning. Not just confined to the living room. Could be the kitchen. You walk in through the front door, fresh out of Tesco's. We know what you've bought, right? Because Tesco's Club Card can tell us what we've bought. We can start to curate recipes, bring in shows that show you how to make the stuff. We can interact with a real environment, showing you which pan's on, giving you a timer. All those sorts of things become possible because of the incredible power of machine learning. So the algorithms, and what the algorithms will lead to, is a very, very different way of living, a very different way of working. Now, the extremists would then go to a place like this, where this dystopian future, where the algorithms, that we no longer respond to email anymore because the algorithms do it for it. We live in a world of robots, so the robots do all the heavy lifting at work, and the human beings ultimately become redundant. But that's not my view of the future, and really to understand why, you have to understand that there are limits to what machine learning can do. There are limits to what the algorithms can do. And then in order to understand the limits, you have to understand how it works. Some of you may remember this. This did the rounds on email back in 2003. And it was based on a proper bit of academic research that showed that as long as you keep the first and last characters in the same place, you can completely mix up the intermediate characters and you'll still make sense of this sentence. Now, the reason that works is the same way that machine learning works, because it's based on a pattern. You all have, at the back of your brains, a pattern of language, something that you have built up over your entire life. And you use that pattern when you see something like this, and you can make sense. The pattern helps you make sense of all of this. Now, the reality is, what do you think happens when I show somebody who doesn't speak English this slide, or a kid who's yet to form their language skills? Make no bloody sense of it at all, because they don't have the pattern. So it's the patterns that are important, but the patterns themselves are limited. The patterns can't be used to generate new patterns. They're constraints. They're constraints to how the things work. If I give you another example, if we pick on two supercomputers, let's pick on IBM's Watson and IBM's Big Blue, respectively the world's best Jeopardy player, US TV quiz show, and the world's best chess player, right? These things are absolutely incredible, just supercomputers, powerful at what they do. But they've been provided with a pattern. And it's that limitation that makes it really interesting, because I bet you I could beat both of those supercomputers with one hand tying me on my back at a game of Snap or a game of Tiddlywinks, right? Because they haven't got the pattern. And as we move into a world of robotics, other paradoxes take over. There's this lovely thing called Moravec's paradox, which is basically what we think is really hard is actually really easy for computers and algorithms, and what we think is really easy is actually really hard. And what Moravec is talking about, he's talking about basically, we think all the cognitive stuff is hard work, right? So if I were to ask you, what's 47 divided by 13, right, you could work it out, but it's a hard sum, right? You spend nanoseconds for a computer. Flip that around, if I were to pick up a ball and throw it to one of you, you would instinctively reach up and catch it, fine motor skills. That is really, really difficult for us to figure out when it comes to robotics. So the irony for me, yes, we can create the world's best chess player, beat anybody on the planet, can't pick up the pieces, can't set the board up, right? So these are the limits of the algorithms, and this is why human beings will still have a massive role for many years to come in piecing together the context of why these things are important, in building the patterns, in connecting the patterns in order to deliver more things. So moving forward, there's some things I want you to take away back to your organizations or the way you approach your customer. The first thing is that you understand, based on the gift of all of this technology, if you want to deliver a transformational experience, if you want to change the way people think or work about technology, you actually need people who are empowered to be transformational. So if you're an organization like Tesco's and you want transformational customer experiences, the only way you're going to do it is if you make sure your entire company is empowered to be transformational. And that empowerment comes from two places. It comes from a place of culture, so you need a culture that supports that kind of transformation. And secondly, you need the tools that will enable that transformation, very, very different styles of collaboration. Organizations really need to start to think about this thing. They need to stop thinking in terms of organizations and instead think in terms of intelligent organisms. Now, this is something that's really familiar in startup land, but in corporates it's really difficult because you need teams of people who effectively will self-govern. They're malleable, they will change, they will evolve, they will respond to whatever's going on in the business, not wait for some command and control hierarchy, but they've empowered by their organization to be able to solve problems and do things for themselves. In order to do that, organizations have to think really differently about their people. We have to unleash the power that lies latent within the workforce. And typically that means thinking about individuals outside of the boundary of their individual job description. Most organizations treat people they just look at them in terms of the context, the narrow domain of the role they fulfill with the organization, and they leave all of the rest of the stuff they bring in every single day behind, even though it's incredibly valuable. Because actually, as an individual, not only can I fulfill your job description, I also bring with me a whole bunch of expertise and experience from other roles, other things I've done. Even the bizarre, wacky stuff I get up to on weekends has value to you, if only you can open up and find a way of tapping into that. And in order to do that, really where this goes, and I think this is something that's really pertinent to you and the role that you play and where Azure fits in, is I think organizations have to create this thing that I call a data culture. And a data culture is really important. It's partly about tools, I'll talk about those in a minute, but it's really about a mindset. A data culture is about having that inquisitive, curious, entrepreneurial mind about what could I do? What could I do if I could have access to the finance department's data and I connected that to the Met Office's, data and did all that stuff? That's the kind of culture that we need everybody, not just the data scientists, but everybody to have. And secondly, we have to understand that the tools are getting easier and more accessible. It's a bit like, do you remember Excel 15 years ago? If you wanted to write a formula in Excel 10 or 15 years ago, you needed 7 bloody manuals, a PhD in about 4 weeks, and if you were really lucky, you might get the syntax right and it would work. Now, today, I click on a bloody button in the ribbon, And it auto-completes. The same's happening with machine learning. This Monday's announcement of Azure ML is absolutely crucial. The power of the algorithms is going to get closer and closer and closer to normal human beings, such that they can have access to that power. So if you combine those two things, the sort of the culture of being inquisitive and wanting to do more with data, with the accessibility of the tools, and make sure those tools are available to your individuals, wonderful things will start to happen. So my future is not this, right? This is not the Terminator. The internet, believe it or not, is not Skynet. I see a really different future. My future is much more like this. I see a world where we are lifted by technology, where we stand on the shoulders of these mechanical giants, and we are able to achieve more in our lives as a result because we put technology in the right place. And the thing is, for me, this is a debate we've always had as a society. It's nothing new. I remember when I was a lad and I did my maths O-level, and if you don't know what an O-level is, it's kind of like GCSEs but harder. And it was a really important point in our society, because it was the point at which pocket calculators had become commercially available and affordable, right? So everybody could have a calculator. I mean, this huge debate as a society, should we let kids use calculators at school? And as a result, I did my maths O-level with a bloody logbook and a slide rule. Now let me tell you, I'm a better mathematician with a calculator than I am with a tabulated bit of paper and a slidey bit of plastic. Yes, I need to know the basics of arithmetic, but using the technology, I can lift my capabilities. I can achieve more. This is the challenge we all face every single day with the digital deluge, with the opportunity that technology places at our feet. My challenge to all of you is, what can you do to lift yourselves, to rise up and do more with technology, whether it's for yourselves or your customers? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.